It's the final day of the Critérium du Dauphiné presented by American Classic. Another high mountain day in the Alps and the last day for Tour de France contenders Chris Froome and Alberto Contador to go head-to-head before the Tour starts in a few weeks.
And one more tough mountain climb in the Dauphiné before we crown the champion. Finishing climb to Monte de Risoul, very tough and miserable conditions for the peloton.
Just over 30 miles and 2 climbs now left to go. This is the Epic Cycle Series presented by Michelob Ultra. The final day at the 65th edition of the Critérium du Dauphiné. Today, stage number 8, just under 100 miles in southeastern France, and the first real bad weather day the riders have encountered all week long. I'm Steve Schlanger alongside Bob Roll. We're looking at the main field that contains the GC contenders, including Chris Froome, who wears the yellow jersey of overall leader, leading his teammate, the only other rider within 1 minute, heading into this final day.
And third is Michael Rogers. His team worked very hard yesterday to dislodge Rowan Dennis, and they've done that. Mick Rogers, if he can hold that position, will finish on the podium. A good result for the Australian.
Earlier today, we had the largest breakaway we've seen at this race. 24 riders had a gap of 3.5 minutes, and because of the pace of the yellow jersey group, it started to come down. A few riders have dropped back, but we still have a very large group at the front, leading the main field by 2 minutes as we go under 50K left.
Some of the names of the men in the breakaway: Travis Meyer, Juan Garate, Michael Goose. And from yesterday's breakaway, Tim Wellens is up in this group. K-Mayor, Jeslan, Martinez, almost half of the peloton, it seems like, in the breakaway. Interestingly, Johnny Mearsman started that earlier in the day to go for the points for the green jersey, and he was able to get those.
Now, today's final stage takes the riders northeast through the southeastern portion of France, through the Alps, and over 2 big climbs near the finish, over 12,000 feet of climbing altogether.
Cat 3 already climbed, and Damuzo was able to get points for that. He will go out, the king of the mountains, in this Dauphiné. Col de Var is a tough Category 1, but 14-kilometer climb to the finish line, the Monte de Risoul, to finish off the Critérium du Dauphiné this year.
You see those 2 big climbs, both on the backside of the stage, a pair of Cat 1s at the end of the 65th Dauphiné. And there is Chris Froome on the left-hand side of the screen. He's got a Team Sky rain jacket on over his leader's yellow jersey. And Ian Stannard, his fellow Brit, helping him out with a little food, it looks like, as this is one of the difficult things on a rainy day, Bob. Trying to get food, water. You don't necessarily feel like eating and drinking, but you got to do it.
Oh, you have to stay topped up with your nutrients. Surprisingly, you don't think you'd need to drink water that much on a day like this, but you have to most certainly do that. Chris Froome having a little bit of trouble there with that little panino, a little bit of race food. Also, your fingers get frozen. It's hard to unwrap those, and when you have gloves on, forget about it. You almost need somebody to feed you. And Edvald Bosenhagen trying to help Chris Froome get a little bit of nutrition there in the miles here in the wet, miserable conditions.
Our leading group just about to start the penultimate climb of the day. The Col de Var is a Category 1. It's a long climb, 10.5 kilometers, averaging almost 7%. And the first of 2 Category 1 ascents in the second half of today's stage. And all week long, we've had very good weather. Cool temperatures, sunny skies. Today's the first day where the heavens have really opened up, dealing with a lot of rain. And when you're into the 8th day of racing in the big mountains, it makes it especially difficult.
Absolutely brutal day out on the road. Saxo Bank has done a lot of the pacemaking with the Sky team. There's Vasily Kirienka in the black and blue helmet, third wheel. Nicky Sorensen from the Saxo Bank squad leading the peloton now. Alberto Contador's had a bit of an up and down Dauphiné this week, complaining of allergies. He says he's never raced well in June, and the time trial was disastrous for Contador's overall aspirations in this race, but he's been positive in his comments and he's been performing quite a bit better in the mountains of the last few days of the Dauphiné than he did in the time trial.
Believe it or not, Contador was looking forward to the rain today because he likes riding in the wet stuff. It also helps to wash out some of the allergies in the air that always seem to bother him this time of year.
Pollen count comes down when the raindrops fall, so we'll perhaps see Contador do what he's best at in putting in scintillating attacks in the mountains a little bit later in the stage. Big climb to the finish line, 8 miles. Very tough climb, one of the hardest climbs of the week's racing to finish off the stage and the Dauphiné. Over 51,000 feet of total climbing this week alone in the Dauphiné. And today, a miserable day for the peloton. It's nice to be in a breakaway on the day like this, especially when there's such a big group.
And we have a rider going off the front of that leading group now for Lotto Belisol. That is Tim Wellens. We've seen him in the breaks before at this race, and now trying to accelerate as the climb starts here, and their lead down to exactly 2 minutes over the yellow jersey group.
A little bit of a repeat performance. It looks like Alessandro De Marchi from the Cannondale team in green closing the gap down on Tim Wellens here on the Col de Vars, featuring in the Tour de France many times. This is an iconic alpine climb. From the breakaway, a solid advantage, just over 2 minutes, but nothing but climbing and descending left on today's stage.
Alessandro De Marchi attacking on yesterday's stage, which was the hardest stage of the race, the Queen stage, 5 climbs altogether. Today's stage not as difficult, but we do have some very high alpine climbs to deal with here near the end of the day. And now 2 riders trying to work together and establish a margin over the other breakaway riders. De Marchi in the green, and then in the black, Tim Wellens of the Lotto Belisol squad. But the margin down under 2 minutes to the main field. 47K and 2 climbs left to go on the final day at the Critérium du Dauphiné. Just inside of 30 miles left to go on stage number 8, and that is Chris Froome. Leader since the time trial on stage number 4. He's got the yellow jersey on under the rain slicker, and Froome looking very good. Better each and every day, was good against the clock in the time trial, has held his own in the mountains, and Bob has to be considered the outright favorite for the Tour de France in just 3 weeks' time, don't you think?
I absolutely had to agree with that. Contador doesn't seem to be racing as well this week in particular, but throughout the season, he hasn't had that ferocious accelerations in the mountains, and it's probably his poorest year ever in the time trial. So I think the advantage before the Tour de France, a lot can happen between now and the mountains and the time trials of the Tour, of course. Those are a month away. We'll have a stage of a week of shadow boxing in the Tour to begin with, as we look at our 2 leaders now from a big group, Tim Wellens and Alessandro De Marchi. But Contador has just not had the season that we're accustomed to seeing him have before one of his Tour de France wins in 07 and 09. It remains to be seen if Contador can improve his form between now and the Tour de France. He has been bothered by allergies throughout this week's race. Also, Contador had a big week of training in the mountains before the Dauphiné. So if he has some time to rest, collect himself a little bit, he will be one of the top contenders along with Chris Froome. But Chris Froome certainly is the outright favorite at this year's Tour de France. Contador, a superstar in cycling, a super domestique the last couple of days in the Dauphiné for his teammate Michael Rogers, who finds himself behind the 2 Sky men at the top of the leaderboard, and that's Chris Froome and Richie Porte. It'll be a little interesting to see Contador racing for one of his teammates. Perhaps we'll see that reversed in the Tour de France, and Michael Rogers been hired by Saxo Bank in the offseason to work for Alberto Contador and increase his chances of winning the Tour for the 3rd time in Contador's career.
And Contador riding near the front of this main field. Saxo Tinkoff with 2 riders at the very front of the group, and it was yesterday Contador leading the reduced field of GC contenders. He was actually leading his teammate Michael Rogers, a reversal of roles in some ways, but they were riding to get Michael Rogers 3rd place and try to protect a podium spot that he's also hoping to hold on to here today. But you don't often see Contador leading the main field and riding for one of his teammates the way we saw on the Queen stage.
Not sure if we've ever seen that, but Contador becoming the super domestique for Mick Rogers. peloton 2 minutes and 20 seconds behind our leaders. Huge group in between the two men, Wellens and DeMarchi in the front, and this peloton being led by the Saxo Bank squad. A tremendous show of force by Team Sky throughout this week's racing. They bring a great roster to this, and most of the men from this race we'll see in the Tour de France as well.
Now, Thomas Voeckler, the very popular French rider for Europcar there in the green, winner of a stage earlier this week, hanging near the back of this group, as our two leaders have stretched out the margin now to 2:20. So gaining some time on this field, led by Saxo and Sky, as they start this second to last climb, over 10 kilometers in length, steepest near the top. But Saxo and Sky going to the Tour de France with two of the outright favorites in Contador and Froome, and two of the strongest teams collectively. Contador, for his part, says that he maybe has never had a stronger team to support him, and that man Chris Froome has a Sky squad that is good from top to bottom. It's a lot of the same riders that led Brad Wiggins to his Tour de France win last year. They've reinforced it with a couple of other riders this year, and you also have Richie Porte, who's come into his own throughout the spring months, who's also better than he was a year ago to help Froome in July.
Richie Porte won Paris-Nice, a similar race to this, but early in March. Richie Porte showing that he's one of the best stage racers in the world, and he has been counted on by Froome throughout the proceedings here in the Dauphiné, and Richie Porte's done a great job. Also, Edvald Boasson-Hagen is starting to fire on all cylinders. They've added to their roster a very strong Belarusian from the Movistar squad, Vasily Kirienka. I think he's done the most miles on the front of the peloton of anybody in the Dauphiné, and Kirienka, watch for him to be very strong in the Tour de France as well.
About the amazing thing to me about Chris Froome, who's near the front here, is you don't often see a guy who is such an overwhelming favorite for the Tour de France going in without having ever won a Grand Tour. And that's the situation that Froome is going to find himself in just a few weeks' time.
Well, similar situation to last year with Bradley Wiggins. Hadn't won a Grand Tour, had been very competitive in the Vuelta a España before, as Chris Froome has been. Chris Froome finishing second and fourth in the Vuelta. But you're right, it's a pretty unique situation where the heavy favorite, even more favorite than the former winner, Contador, is Chris Froome. That's because he's been so dominant in this year's season so far. Wins in Critérium International, Tour of Oman, Tour of Romandy, and just one second place besmirching his resume from this year, and that was second place in the Tirreno to a flying Vincenzo Nibali. So Chris Froome, Nibali not in the Tour de France, he might be the only other rider you would put on the same level as Chris Froome currently in the way the peloton is today in cycling.
Yeah, that's the amazing thing to me is Froome seems to be such a huge favorite, so head and shoulders above everyone else, yet hasn't won a Grand Tour, and yet here he is just 3 weeks away from a lot of people expecting him to win the 100th edition of the Tour de France.
Travis Meyer just bridging up to the two men in the front of the bike race from the breakaway, so now there's three at the front.
Just about 27 miles left to go on the penultimate climb of the day in the rain, and now a three-rider group at the front on stage number 8.
And now we're back where we started.
The 100th Tour de France. Coverage begins Saturday, June 29th at 7:30 a.m. Eastern on the NBC Sports Network.
Beginning Saturday, June 29th, NBC and the NBC Sports Network invite you to celebrate a century of brutal climbs, thrilling sprints, and unparalleled triumph. It's the 100th Tour de France. Coverage begins Saturday, June 29th on the NBC Sports Network. And the two teams at the front of the field, Saxo Tinkoff and Sky, two teams with two of the favorites heading towards the Tour. Alberto Contador right in the middle of the screen in the rain jacket, trying to win the Tour for the third time. But he has some work to do over these next few weeks, has a new training base in Lugano, Switzerland, is going to recon some of the Tour courses over the course of these next few weeks before he goes to the start in Corsica. Chris Froome is going to do the same thing. In fact, his team is going to stay near the finishing climb today in Risoul, and they're going to preview some of the Tour route these next few days before a week-long training camp leading into the Tour.
Arrière du peloton, not a nice place to be on a miserable day like this. back of the field. This is the front of the breakaway. 3 men in the front. Travis Meyer bridging up to the 2 men. Tim Willems in the black jersey there. On his wheel in the green is Alessandro De Marchi, 2 of the attackers on yesterday's stage. Travis Meyer's brother, Cam Myers, won the opening time trial in the Tour of Switzerland yesterday. So successful couple of days for the Meyer family.
Yeah, the Tour de Suisse just getting underway yesterday. That'll run all this coming week as the Critérium du Dauphiné comes to an end today. The last 2 big races to prepare for the Tour de France. Why do some riders choose the Dauphiné and others go to Switzerland, Bob?
It depends on how you feel your season is going up until this point. Both of these races tell a lot about what will happen in the Tour de France. Tour de Suisse and Dauphiné, the last 2 preparation races. The Giro used to be used quite often for that, but nowadays it's the Dauphiné primarily and the Tour de Suisse. And if you feel like you need some racing closer to where the Tour de France starts, you will do the Tour of Switzerland. If you feel like you need more recuperation time, then the Dauphiné. Also, if you want to recon the stages from the Tour de France, the Dauphiné is the better of the 2 races, but perhaps for fitness, the Tour de Suisse is a little bit better, and you have to decide that over the years with your coaching staff, with your teammates, and that's when experience comes into play. And Chris Froome is becoming a very experienced pro, but Alberto Contador, he perhaps has a little bit of an advantage, having done so many Grand Tours and been the winner of so many of them.
Well, Froome is on basically the same program that his teammate Wiggins was on last year and performing at the same level, winning a lot of races, almost every stage race he has entered. So he looks almost the same as Wiggins did going to his first Tour de France victory a year ago. But again, Contador has the experience of having won. Froome has not done that. In your mind, how much does that experience count?
Well, when the chips are down and when things get grippy in the Tour de France, it's almost a month long, and a lot can change. Contador will have the confidence knowing that if he goes through a bad few hours or a bad day, he will be able to bounce back. Chris Froome's been consistent, but he hasn't actually stood on the top step of a Grand Tour podium. We might see that happen in July, but for the time being, that advantage is definitely going to Alberto Contador.
David Velou of the Europcar team losing contact with the main field, the first overall leader of the race, and wore the yellow jersey for the first few days after soloing it to a win in stage number 1, part of a breakaway that came apart. He attacked and really rode an individual time trial for almost 30 miles to get the solo win. As we're back up to the front, Contador in the black rain jacket, 2 teammates alongside, Team Sky are right behind, chasing 3 riders who are 2.5 minutes up the road and remnants of the breakaway scattered in between on this second to last climb of the day. Long drag up to the Col de Vars. Climb itself over 10.5 kilometers, and then they'll drop down on the backside with the rider just slipping off his bike on the side of the road there. They'll drop down the backside and then immediately start the final climb of the day up to the summit finish and the end of the race.
Middle of the Col de Vars here. This is the steepest part, over 15% gradient. Col de Vars is a tough climb, but the finishing climb even harder and longer, 8 miles in length to the Monte of Risoul. A lot of damage being done. Sitting on the front of the peloton for the last few miles was Sergio Paulinho. And this is the remnants from the breakaway. Paulinho still on the front. On his wheels been Alberto Contador and Michael Rogers sitting third. Theoretically, it would be Team Sky's job to do these miles of tempo, but because nobody in the breakaway is dangerous to the lead of Chris Froome, Team Sky has been content to let Saxo Bank do all the work throughout today's stage.
Gianni Meersman in that black jacket, part of the early breakaway that was 24 riders strong at 1 point and had a lead of 3.5 minutes. A sprinter for the Omega Pharma Quick Step team who just missed out on some stage wins earlier in the race, and he's hung around and battled through the mountains, staying in the race all the way here to the end.
Mathematically, only a stage win by Chris Froome could dislodge Johnny Meersman from that green jersey as points leader so far, but he does have to get to the finish line within the time limit and hope that Chris Froome does not win the stage, which Chris Froome is most certainly capable of.
Well, this climb averaging 7%, but the leader's now at the steepest point where it hits over 15%. And in the rain, making for a tough day at the Dauphiné. Travis Meyer dropping his 2 other breakaway companions here. Riding out front solo now on this penultimate climb, stage 8 at the Critérium du Dauphiné, presented by American Classic, with the lead at 2:18 over the main field.
Travis Meyer, coming from a track background, a part of the Australian Institute of Sport, group of young riders that are so dominant on the track. A number of them have graduated to success in Europe. Travis and his brother Cameron Meyer started their professional careers with Jonathan Vaughter's Garmin squad, but when this Australian outfit, Orica Green Edge, started, they joined that team. Travis Myers has now dropped DeMarkey and Tim Wellens and streaking to the top here.
And the 24-year-old, former national road champion of Australia 3 years ago, out front by himself after a large breakaway, set the tone for the day earlier in the stage. That's all blown apart. And now a move by a Movistar rider out of the main field. Looks like Alejandro Valverde.
Most certainly does look like Valverde. So this is a tough little attack. Argos Shimano rider moving across. Very small peloton. This is the peloton. Maybe 30 riders left with 2 climbs to go. There's almost as many riders up the road as there are in the peloton. Argos Shimano, teammate of the man chasing Alejandro Valverde from the breakaway.
Now, Valverde has done this a couple of different times, attacking from the main field on a climb here at the Critérium du Dauphiné this week. He's sitting top 10 in the general classification, right now 8th at 2:47 behind Chris Froome. So no big response as they just kind of grind away back in the yellow jersey group. And Valverde rides through some of the residual effects of the earlier large 24 rider breakaway that's coming back. And further down, dropping out of contact with the main field, other riders struggling on the climb on the wet roads. Still a long way to go to the finish when you have 2 Category 1 summits to go over.
That was Angel Madrazo being dropped along with Dominic Nares from the BMC squad. Alejandro Valverde, looks like Warren Baguil, the Frenchman on the Argo squad that absolutely dominated the Tour de l'Avenir last year. Warren Baguil winning all of the jerseys in that, King of the Mountain points and the overall. Baguil, a big star for the French in the future, finding the wheel of Alejandro Valverde. Big attack. Valverde starting the stage quite a ways down in the overall standings, and he's trying to perhaps get a stage win here. Valverde 8th to start the day, 2 minutes 47 seconds behind our race leader Chris Froome.
Alejandro Valverde, the only former winner of the Dauphiné we have in the race this year. He's won it twice. And not getting very far at the moment, just a few seconds ahead of the main field. A lot of riders still between that yellow jersey group and this man who's at the very front of the stage, Travis Meyer of the Orica Green Edge team. Now 2:15 is the gap. Andre Grivko, part of this Astana squad that has come to the Dauphiné with Jakob Fuglsang as their team leader. He'll also be their top man for the upcoming Tour de France, and yesterday almost got a stage win. He was in that late 2-man move with Sammy Sanchez, and Sanchez out-sprinted him at the line at the summit finish.
Thomas Vogler seen Reese just yo-yoing off the back of the very small main field, chasing Travis Meyer. Still a number of riders in between Travis Meyer and the charging peloton, led by the Saxo Bank squad, including these 2 men who have just left that group. That's Alejandro Valverde. I believe that's Warren Baguil, the young Frenchman on the Argos team, trying to close down some of this 2-minute 17-second advantage to Travis Meyer, and that's been a very steady gap. He's held the peloton in check on this very tough Col de Vars. So great riding by Travis Myers on this, the penultimate climb of the Dauphiné.
Just under 25 miles now left to go in stage number 8, and the gap really hasn't gone out much. 2.5 minutes since we've seen the riders at the start of this second to last climb. That's as big a gap as our leaders have enjoyed. Now down to 2:17 for the one man out front, Travis Meyer. So the work being done by Saxo Tinkoff and also Team Sky, keeping things under control in the rain. Mist hanging overhead as Alessandro Di Marchi tries to claw his way back up to the front of the stage here. Di Marchi showing a resilient approach in the final few days here of the Dauphiné this week. As we come back, Tim Wellens of Lotto Belisol dropped by the two men ahead of him, now trying to make his way back up to once again form a three-man group at the front of the stage. 2:14 lead on the main field and still climbing towards the summit of the Category 1 Col de Vars, and just about a kilometer or so away from the top of the climb now.
The climb a little more gradual at the top, allowing Di Marchi and Wellens to catch back up to Travis Meyer. It's still over 8% all the way to the top of the Col de Vars. The final climb of the day, not quite as irregular of a climb. It's a lot longer, more gradual, but it doesn't kick up and then level off like the Col de Vars does. Now they're above the tree line, and that's when things get grippy in professional bike racing.
A wet day anywhere you look as the rain continues to fall on the riders in the high mountains of southeastern France. What kind of a day is it for a team like Sky and Saxo Tinkoff to a degree to control a breakaway when you have these big climbs late in the wet weather?
Well, in one way, it's a lot more straightforward. You know exactly what you have to do. You go to the front of the peloton with your teammates and just do a steady tempo. On another hand, you never know how the body's going to respond to a wet, miserable day like this after a relatively beautiful week of racing. So I remember trying to defend the leader's jersey on days like this in the Tour de France and other races, Giro d'Italia, and very nervous in the morning for a teammate of one of the race leaders. But as the day goes on, you hold the breakaway in check. Things are straightforward in a way psychologically, but also you have to hope that you have a pretty decent day just to be able to sit at the front and do the tempo.
This is a group that is between our three leaders and this main field, which we're staring at the back of now. And the man in the red jacket for Team Sky, Edvald Boasson-Hagen, the Norwegian who won a stage earlier in the race and coming off a win in the overall at his home stage race, the Tour of Norway, not too long ago.
Richie Port, number 3, grinding up the Col de Vars. Ian Stannard, Edvald Boasson-Hagen just being tailed off a little bit. He might be dropping off his rain gear to the car. He still needs to stay in that group. There's still a lot of miles left before the finish, and Chris Froome needs every teammate he can muster to defend whatever attacks might still come. So Edvald Boasson-Hagen, if he's being dropped now, it's going to be a long, hard day for Boasson-Hagen. Wouldn't surprise me to see him get back into the front group there over the climb. If he's having a little bit of a tough go of it here in the last kilometer of this climb, he should be able to catch back in on the descent. And it is a very dangerous descent off of the Col de Vars before the last climb of the Monte de Risoul.
Travis Meyer in the front, sitting on his wheel. Alessandro Di Marchi, our two leaders, coming to the top of this very long climb now. Within just a few hundred meters from the summit, they will then go straight down and then right back up after the descent. The climb of the final ascent starts almost immediately.
Attacks from the GC favorites coming from the field now, most especially Alejandro Valverde. That might spell doom for this breakaway. Valverde attacking a long ways from the finish line. A little bit of panic to the other riders. When you see a man of the caliber of Alejandro Valverde going, it just naturally ups the tempo in the chase group. Even if Valverde is a long way down in the overall standings, when Contador sees that, Chris Froome and his teammates see that, they will just naturally increase their pacemaking, and that might spell doom for the men in the front of the bike race. Have been out there all day and deserving winners, but that might not be the case. A lot of miles left to go. Some of them downhill, but the final 8 all the way up into the clouds on the Monte de Risoul, a very tough climb to finish off what's been a very, very hard week of racing. Pretty good hands there by Travis Meyer, plucking a rain jacket out of that musette. And that's absolutely essential on this descent. Cold, wet, rainy, miserable day. If you get a chill on the descent, it takes that much longer to warm up for the final climb. Great grab by Travis Meyer.
A lot of times you'll see riders stuffing newspapers down their vests to stay warm as well on a descent. This is Tim Wellens, who has not been able to regain contact with those two out front, part of the three-man group earlier. Third man over the top of the climb. Our leaders a shade more than 2 minutes ahead of the yellow jersey group. And other riders ahead of the field, but behind our leaders at the front of the stage. Again, some stragglers from the early breakaway. But Alejandro Valverde of Movistar, certainly a dangerous rider in this group. He's in the dark colors with the green helmet. And he attacked from the main field just a short while ago.
There is Valverde coming through. A little bit of an advantage on the chasing peloton. Still hasn't quite caught up to the leaders yet. It's a very dangerous, slippery descent off of this Col de Vars. And then straight up to the final climb of the day once they get to the valley floor after this descent. Alejandro Valverde can just see the king of the mountain point.
Well, some folks go to greater lengths than others to welcome the riders, to get some attention, and some hardy souls to come out at the top of a climb on a day like today. It's cold, it's raining. You can look at the flags and see the wind that's blowing. So a nasty Sunday in the French Alps. And this is also going to be a nasty descent on these wet roads with the wind blowing as well.
Jose Herrada, the man in the dark blue, part of the early breakaway, looking over his shoulder to see where his team captain Alejandro Valverde is. He's seen these riders pedal away on the slopes of the Col de Var. Tim Wellens coming back to our two leaders, Alessandro De Marchi, and leading throughout the final miles of the climb and so far on the descent is Travis Myers.
Now this is the back of the main field now, going over the top.
Just saw Edvald Bosenhagen get back into the lead group there. So Bosenhagen detached in the last couple of Ks, but regrouping a little bit at the top of the mountain. And we'll see if Bosenhagen has any energy left to help Chris Froome and Richie Porte get to the bottom of the last climb in good order.
Our three leaders now. De Marchi at the front, Meyer sitting second wheel, and Tim Wellens third. Here are the chasers. In the dark colors here, Alejandro Valverde, number 171. And they are trying to catch our three men out front. Leaders over 2 minutes ahead of the main field. That's getting reduced in numbers with every pedal stroke, it seems. 33.3K now left to go. The Critérium du Dauphiné winding down. A wet descent here, and then one final climb. One last stage winner here on the 8th day of racing on the NBC Sports Network. Frenchman Warren Barguil of the Argos Shimano team on the descent of the penultimate climb on stage 8 at the Critérium du Dauphiné. Rain continuing to fall. It started raining much earlier in the stage, so it's been a slog for all of the riders left in the peloton. These are our three leaders at the moment, Wellens, Meyer, and De Marchi. And their gap has been hovering between 2 and 2.5 minutes for quite a while now. Hasn't been going up and really hasn't been coming down dramatically.
Not out of the question that those three could get caught on the descent. It's generally climbing where the big time differences are made and lost in professional bike racing. But such a nasty day and such a dangerous descent, if you're not on your game on the descents, you could lose 2 minutes easily. That advantage is already, they've already lost 10 seconds. Ian Standard on the front and Edvald Bosenhagen, veteran, professional, and one of the best descenders in the game. Some nervous riders on this descent, others that throw caution to the wind, and you can make up a lot of time on this descent. The three in the front, this is no time for them to rest, or they'll get caught before the final climb even begins.
This is the yellow jersey group, but the yellow jersey of overall leader Chris Froome has not been visible today. He's been wearing a black rain jacket. But it will be interesting to see him on this descent, because if there's one thing he needs to work on at least a little going into the Tour de France, it is his descending skills. That's what cost him in the only stage race he's entered this year that he hasn't won, Tirreno Adriatico, where he was beaten by Vincenzo Nibali.
In similar miserable conditions in the Tirreno. Here's our three leaders. Looked like Stannard and Boasson Hagen sat up a little bit. They had gotten a bit of an advantage over the rest of the riders in the main group, and so they sat up. The gap's gone up a couple of seconds. It's just at around 2 minutes. A couple of false flats on this descent. Order restored here in the group, and a long thin line of riders trying to make it safely off this very treacherous descent of the Col de Vars.
As the race leader, Chris Froome has the GC seemingly well in hand. How much do you want to risk on a descent like this? What would be your approach?
I would go as slowly as I possibly could if I was Team Sky. Make sure that the one thing that can go wrong in this whole week's race is in the next couple of miles. If Chris Froome falls off because they're making too dangerous a tempo, and that is a very poor use of resources. Boasson Hagen, a very good descender, but he needs to take it nice and easy down this descent. You don't gain anything by taking 10 or 15 seconds out of the three men in the breakaway who are so far down in the overall standings. But if Chris Froome gets a little bit nervous and falls off, then it's an absolute disaster.
Humberto Losado here, the Spaniard for the Katusha squad, trying to come across. Katusha, led by Joaquim Rodriguez, one of the hopefuls for the overall at the upcoming Tour de France. And we've seen him attack in limited fashion, but really haven't seen his trademark accelerations in the big climbs this week at the Critérium du Dauphiné. Been very intriguing with J-Rod not lighting up the climbs the way he normally does. So our leaders holding on to a margin of just over 2 minutes. One climb now left to go here at the Critérium du Dauphiné. The Epic Cycle Series presented by Michelob Ultra. Final day, stage 8 at the 65th Critérium du Dauphiné, presented by American Classic. Steve Schlanger with Bob Roll. They've gone over one Category 1 climb in the rain here in the French Alps. On the descent of that climb, headed towards one final Cat 1 climb to round off the race. Our leaders hanging on to a gap of just over 2 minutes. This is the yellow jersey group led by the team of the yellow jersey. Team Sky down to almost 25K left to go. That puts the riders at just inside of 16 miles from the finish. Oh, and a crash. A Cofidis rider goes down. Also, another rider hits the deck in front of him on the wet road.
Hitting that little traffic bump right there, covered in very slippery white paint. Great riding by Matthew Boucher to make it through the flying wheels. And Contador is one of the crashers also.
Wow, Alberto Contador going down for Saxo Tinkoff. He came up behind the rider from Cofidis, and it was trying to avoid the rider that caused Contador to actually crash, it looked like. And now he's got to chase. Now Contador sitting behind and then trying to brake and avoid the Cofidis rider, just nowhere to go.
Wow. Tough crash here. When you're cold and miserable like that and then you hit the deck, double indemnity for the riders coming off. Cofidis man and Alberto Contador crashing.
Oh, Bob, that's often why riders like Contador who fight for the GC are near the front of the group to avoid moments like that.
We'll see what happens in the front of the peloton here if they turn off the gas a little bit and allow one of Chris Froome's main rivals, not just in the Dauphiné, but in cycling throughout the year, especially in the Tour de France, But Contador now is going to have to chase. One teammate's with him now to close that gap down. Looks like Sergio Palhinho must have heard about the crash, so trying to bring Contador back into the front. A little bit of a respite from the descent here. Falls flat. Contador looks to be okay. See if he can catch back up to the peloton being led by the Sky Team.
It's really not a GC question in terms of battling Froome for the overall win, because Contador started the day almost 3 minutes down. This seems to be more about what that crash might have done physically to Contador.
Oh, most definitely. Contador concentrated now.
His shorts ripped on the left-hand side.
Well, the visibility is most certainly not helping. Just before that crash, saw Andrew Talansky asking for service from the car. Talansky making it through there safely as well. Good to see Andrew Talansky having a good day on the last day of the Dauphiné. Very select group in the front, and Talansky been able to make it there so far on today's stage. But Contador riding near the front throughout the climbs, went a little bit too far back and then coming to grief just on some of that traffic furniture that is pretty consistent throughout France and wreaks havoc on the professional peloton.
Well, for all the troubles that Contador had in the individual time trial when he coughed up 2 minutes 44 seconds to Chris Froome, he said coming into today's final stage of the Dauphiné that his condition is perfect. He's right where he wants to be, about 75% of his maximum. He says he's never all that good in the month of June. Allergies are always an issue, but he feels he has the time and he's on the right track to be at his best for the Tour de France.
And astronomical levels of pollen in the air in France after a very wet spring and a very warm week. So the pollen exploding into the air, really giving Alberto Contador a tough time, especially this June and this Dauphiné. Bo Hassenhagen, second wheel. Ian Stannard, the man, seemed to just be making a regular, not dangerous tempo, not trying to go in full flight on this descent. Contador's made it back into the flotilla of cars that follow the peloton. And it should be just a question of time before he can get back into the front, assuming he has no further troubles on this descent.
It's a very long descent, as you have seen, through the clouds, on the wet roads as the rain continues to fall. This is far from an ideal scenario.
There's the race referee's car that follows just behind the lead group. So Contador successfully back. Race radio saying Contador back in the front group after his crash. You can forget about the 240 gap he's back in, with the group being led by the Sky Team now. Of course, Saxo Bank pulling off the front and waiting for their team captain, Alberto Contador, to get back into the thick of things here on the last descent of the Dauphiné. It's pretty bad luck to crash on the very last descent of a stage race that has over 50,000 feet of climbing.
Now, this is Tim Wellens. He is trying to regain contact with the leaders. Travis Meyer, also Alessandro Di Marchi. He's been up there with him a few different times. He's been dropped a couple of times, and once again trying to catch back up on a very tricky descent. The gap 222 back to this main field for those leaders. And no helicopter coverage today because of the inclement weather. So sometimes it's the cameras on the motorbikes that are trying to capture the different groups that are out there on the road, some with the leaders, some with the main field, and some with riders like Contador, who crashed and now have to try and catch back up.
Tim Wellens unable or unwilling to match the tempo of Alessandro Di Marchi on the descent, losing a little bit of time. It's always better to sit on the wheel rather than time trial behind the men you're with. So Tim Wellens having a tough time with this descent as well, but not as tough as that man, Alberto Contador, in the middle of your screen in the blue and yellow.
Team Sky riding to protect the overall lead of Chris Froome, hoping to hold it for just about 20 more kilometers to win his first ever Critérium du Dauphiné. Just inside of a dozen miles left to go through the fog and the rain. dealing with wet roads for what's left of this field on the 8th and final stage of the Critérium du Dauphiné. And for the first time in a while, the gap for our leaders has gone out beyond 2.5 minutes. Now 2:45 for this four-man group. And Manuel Quinziano of BMC has joined our leaders at the front.
Losado and Quinziano from BMC tacking on to our leaders after being dropped on the Col de Vars. So Quinziano just coming back into the front. He must have put in a pretty serious descent to get back into our lead group.
This is what it looks like at the summit finish, where the road levels off just ever so slightly near the top of the final climb. As we move back to our leaders, Alessandro Di Marchi here in the green, losing a little contact on the descent. And headed towards that final climb that starts with 14 kilometers left to go. That's 8.5 miles straight uphill to the end of the race.
Travis Meyer, second wheel, Losado leading. We don't see Tim Wellens. Tim Wellens being dropped on the descent. So
Thomas Vogler is pulled out of the race as well.
Tremendous amount of attrition in the last stage here. Pierre Roland, the teammate of Vogler, dropping out earlier. Hushovd, Chavanel, Buoni, De Hint, Jose Herrada, Daniel, Tekla Hyman out. Some of the names that have already abandoned this year's edition of the Dauphiné.
At the front of the main field, Team Sky continuing to set the pace. Chris Froome near the front in a black rain jacket. And now our four leaders once again. Travis Meyer, Losado, and then Di Marchi and Quinziano at the back. And as they approach the final climb, Bob, they're going to hit the base with a pretty sizable margin. What do you think about their chances at this point?
Well, the gap has gone up. They've gained a minute on the descent to 2:42 almost. I think the crash of Contador had a little bit of that. The front of the group just taking a nice, reasonable descent off of the Col de Vars. Contador, bad luck to crash. A little hesitation in the field, however, has allowed the gap to go back up close to 3 minutes now. And with 9 miles to go, the advantage swings over to the men in the breakaway. Di Marchi, the last survivor of the early morning breakaway on yesterday's stage. And he's found the right maneuver so far on today's stage. So in the green jersey, the man from yesterday who just got caught before the end, out in the breakaway.
Team Sky leading the main field, still on the descent of the second to last climb of the stage. And losing ground to our four leaders, who are up the road, 2:44 ahead. Beginning Saturday, June 29th, NBC and the NBC Sports Network invite you to celebrate a century of brutal climbs, thrilling sprints, and unparalleled triumph. It's the 100th Tour de France. Coverage begins Saturday, June 29th on the NBC Sports Network. Our four leaders starting the final climb of the race with a 3-minute lead on the main field. There is a rider, Warren Barguil, in between, 2:15 behind this four-rider group and sitting still ahead of the yellow jersey group, that reduced field of GC contenders. Now it's a category 1, 14 kilometers long, just over 8.5 miles, averaging 6.5%, but a very steady climb. It does hit some 9% with about 2K to go and then levels off right at the top. Team Sky setting the pace once again at the head of the main field. Alberto Contador on the right-hand side of the screen after his crash has regained contact and taken up that familiar spot near the front.
Ian Stannard doing the pacemaking on his wheel. The very steady Edvald Bosenhagen, Geraint Thomas on his wheel. This is the juggernaut, arguably the strongest team in cycling. And of course, they have the first two positions in the overall standings with Chris Froome. And in third wheel is Richie Porte, who's having a fantastic season and a great week out on the open roads of the Dauphiné, catching Alberto Contador, his 2-minute man, on stage number 4 in the individual time trial. Well, that's good for your morale if you're Richie Porte. For Alberto Contador, one of the best cyclists in the world, to be caught during a 32-kilometer time trial, just 20 miles long. It's got to be pretty discouraging, and we've just seen him crash on the final descent of the Dauphiné coming off the Col de Vars.
Well, for the main field, as they look to claw back some time from our leaders, the final climb that they're about to hit will be a little easier than some of the other ones they've gone over in pursuit of a breakaway. It's not one of those stair-stepping climbs that changes gradients and comes up on narrow patches of poorly paved road. This is a very steady climb all the way on a big wide road like the one they're on right now. So the tempo that Team Sky can set can be a very steady one, and they can rely on that to bring a lot of the time back from the breakaway.
And 3 minutes, 13 seconds now to these four men in the front. They were joined by Quinziato and Losada on the descent. Travis Meyer is the Orica rider, and sitting fourth wheel, Alessandro De Marchi. The last couple of days have been very good to De Marchi in the Dauphiné this year. The last man caught from the early morning breakaway on yesterday's stage, Sammy Sanchez, went on to win, but it was almost the man in green from the front group, Alessandro De Marchi, that was just a few hundred meters from staying away for a stage win yesterday.
So Alberto Contador right behind Team Sky. Chris Froome about 4 or 5 wheels back. Again, he's got the black rain jacket on, covering up the leader's yellow jersey. And all of the responsibility falling to Team Sky in the last several miles to bring back the breakaway, or at least keep things under control here. The gap has grown to 3:13 as they come up on the final dozen kilometers of racing. 8 miles left to go, all uphill. Second of back-to-back Cat 1 climbs here on this 8th and final stage.
Sergio Paulinho doing the work for Alberto Contador earlier in the stage. The back of this field being led now by Edvald Bosenhagen on his wheel, Ian Standard. Ian Standard, no stranger these conditions in the spring. One of the most brutal editions of Milano-San Remo in the 100-plus year history of that race. The man on second wheel, Ian Standard, was able to get 6th place. So that was a spectacular result for Ian Standard earlier this spring, and perhaps enjoying these cold conditions quite a bit warmer than Milano-San Remo.
A lot of climbing still to come here, but how do you like the chances of this 4-man breakaway of fighting it out for a stage win at this point?
3 minutes lead is pretty solid for 4 guys. They didn't have any flat miles to work together in between the 2 climbs to finish off the stage, and they're straight onto the early slopes of the Monte de Risoul. The steepest gradient is only 2 kilometers from the top. It kicks up at 9%, but a very regular climb throughout the early part.
Oh, all of a sudden, here comes Tim Wellens again.
Tim Wellens in no man's land in between the 4 leaders, Warren Barguil and Alejandro Valverde, and the chasing peloton.
Well,
not a great descender, but he definitely is on solid climbing form. He's caught right up to our 4 leaders.
And taking a pull at the very front. So now a 5-man group with over a 3-minute lead to this main field. And for the first time, we see the yellow jersey of the overall leader, Chris Froome, who has shed his rain jacket. Froome still looking good near the front, protecting his general classification placing as he aims to win this race for the first time, and will then look to become just the 9th man to ever win both the Dauphiné and the Tour de France in the same season. Of course, his teammate Brad Wiggins did it last year.
Breakaway with a solid chance now, still over 3 minutes advantage. And the best climbers in the race, Alberto Contador, Alejandro Valverde, Joaquin Rodriguez, a long ways down in the overall standing. The first 2 men are on the same team for the overall, so the advantage swinging over to the breakaway. Jack Bauer, Garmin rider from New Zealand, looking for a bike change at the bottom of this last climb. And the Belarusian machine, Vasily Kuryenka, at the front of the field.
All right, Bob, this is the last climb for Froome and Contador. to face off before the Tour de France. As far as the other GC contenders who are still here, guys like Joaquim Rodriguez, potentially Alejandro Valverde, and some other names. What do you expect from them? Because in terms of physical blows, psychological blows, this is going to be the last chance for them to do anything.
Well, every acceleration that Chris Froome makes today puts him a step closer to winning the Dauphiné. So a lot of incentive for Chris Froome. Also, that will have a double whammy on his competitors by maybe giving them a little bit of a psychological disadvantage going into the Tour de France if Chris Froome is able to dislodge them. For Rodriguez, for Contador, for Valverde, if Froome accelerates, they need to be able to follow those accelerations here on the last day. This is the last time we'll see them square off before the Tour de France that starts just under 3 weeks from today.
Kyrienka leading the way for Team Sky. The yellow jersey emerging. Chris Froome at the front. And they trail by 3 minutes. Here is Tim Wellens at the very front. Stage 8 of the Critérium du Dauphiné presented by American Classic. This group, the main field, 2:53 back. So they've got the gap under 3 minutes with 6 miles left to go. Now coming towards the end of this 8-day race, the traditional preamble for the Tour de France. Critérium du Dauphiné, first held back in 1947, and interestingly enough, the only other race that has been won by all of the 5-time winners of the Tour de France. Anquetil, Merckx, Hinault, and Miguel Indurain.
Big Mig coming to these mountains to fine-tune his form during his run at 5 Tour de France wins in a row.
It's a perfect illustration of how important this race has been as a stepping stone and a foundation for those riders to go on and win the Tour de France over the years.
Including Alberto Contador, although he never won here at the Dauphiné. The times that he did win the Tour, he participated in the Dauphiné. Barguil coming back into the group after a little bit of a raid there on the climb of the Col de Vars, but a pulverizing tempo being set by Vasily Kyrienka, starting to reef through the remnants of the breakaway. Chris Froome's taken off his rain jacket. One climb between what will be a great stage win. Pretty handy lead on Michael Rogers. The man closest to Chris Froome is his own teammate, Richie Porte. Froome stealing the Critérium International away from Richie Porte earlier this spring. And it's obviously not the same magnitude of race as the Dauphiné, but it was his teammate Richie Porte that excelled in the time trial, had the leader's jersey, and Chris Froome attacking on the mountain stage to finish off the Critérium International way back in March. Chris Froome just winning that by a couple of seconds over his teammate Richie Porte. Maybe a reversal of those fortunes on today's stage. That would be rather shocking, though. And Chris Froome almost a minute ahead of Richie Porte, his own teammate.
Juan Antonio Flecha, part of the early breakaway on the day. He's been in multiple breaks throughout the race this week. Veteran. First Argentine to win a stage at the Tour de France a decade ago. And Kyrienka grinding away at the front for Team Sky. And as far as climbs go, when you're trying to bring a breakaway back or at least keep them in check and under control, this is a perfect climb because it's a regular, steady gradient, good roads, so you don't have to do anything special. You can just set a steady tempo, and normally that'll do the trick for a team chasing like Sky. Now, Johan Bagot is the rider who crashed from Cofidis earlier, and now trying to regain contact with the field. Contador ran over him. He crashed as well, and then Contador was able to regain contact with this main field and rotate to the front pretty quickly on the descent of the climb.
Tough moments at the back of the field. These riders just struggling up this final climb. That was Brent Bookwalter from BMC, hoping to do the Tour de France. He's been a very steady performer here at the Dauphiné.
Well, it's been a very interesting breakaway. Tim Wellens, part of the early move, then was dropped on more than one occasion, fought back on more than one occasion. Now He's past the other breakaway riders. He's at the very front, but a lot of the riders we've seen in the small groups that have been leading here late, they've all been dropped at one point or another, and they've fought their way back. Normally, when you're in a breakaway, you get caught. Many times you'll just slip back into the field and sometimes out the back of the peloton, and then you'll get guys attacking from the main field who then form another breakaway. But that's not been the case today.
That's certainly the vagaries of the mountains. When you have a bad couple of kilometers, you lose time, but sometimes you recover and you're able to get back into a better rhythm and catch up to the men that you were with. For Tim Wellens, almost a repeat of yesterday's stage. The first attacker didn't work out yesterday, but he's put some clear daylight between himself and the 4 men that were just with him. Manuel Quinziato, also Alessandro De Marchi, also in the breakaway, chasing now Tim Wellens, the lone leader, but still 2.5 minutes ahead of this field.
A little over 5 miles from the finish. Steady road uphill to the summit finish of stage 8 and the end of the Dauphiné. We come back to the front of the main field. The yellow jersey of overall leader Chris Froome sitting 5th wheel right behind his teammate Richie Porte. And they're bringing the gap from our leaders down to close to 2 minutes now. 2:15 with under 7K left to go. So coming up on the final 4 miles. There's Alberto Contador in the yellow and blue after his crash earlier. Looks no worse for the wear. He says, Bob, he's right where he wants to be in terms of his Tour de France preparations, but given what we've seen from him this week, would you agree, or do you think he's behind?
Well, he's putting a very positive spin on what must be a difficult week of racing. Absolutely pitiful in the time trial. Suffering from allergies. Let's face it, it's not easy to race under those conditions. You have to be at your very best to win any stage race. So Alberto Contador does have some weeks of training he can do in between the end of this and the start of the Tour de France. I have a feeling he's going to be in very good shape. He's also looking for some revenge at the Tour de France, and a bike racer that is looking for revenge can sometimes produce his best efforts, and we'll see if that's the case with Alberto Contador. He's had a solid Dauphiné, and he's gotten better each day, and that's very encouraging. Whether or not he's exactly where he wants to be, well, he says he is, so we'll see. He's won the Tour de France twice before in his career. He's going for a 3rd win in this year's edition, the 100th edition of the Tour.
Alejandro Valverde attacking from the main field earlier, but reeled back in. Sitting in the group now. That's 2:12 behind Tim Wellens, our lone leader. Well, Bob, on balance, do you see Contador as being the biggest threat still to Chris Froome, or
Yes.
is there somebody else?
No, I think that Contador will still provide Chris Froome with his biggest challenge during the Tour de France. I don't see anybody else capable. You know, Contador did win the Volta a España, the last Grand Tour of last year, so if he can produce a similar level of fitness, he'll be right there with Chris Froome. And it is a very mountainous Tour de France, and that suits the talents of Contador. Last year's Tour de France, a lot of long, flat time trial miles that definitely suited Bradley Wiggins better than any of the other Grand Tour contenders in the sport of cycling right now. But to this year's Tour de France, a very different proposition. Big mountains, and that should suit Contador, but it also suits Chris Froome absolutely perfectly.
Wellens, after getting dropped a few different times by the breakaway, has found a 3rd and 4th wind, it appears. Now our lone leader, the 22-year-old Belgian, a 2nd-year pro, has never won a race as prestigious as a stage win would be here at the Critérium du Dauphiné. Now has a lead of over 2 minutes on this group.
Bo Hagen on the front. Tim Wellens giving the slip to the other riders from the breakaway. Quinziato, Wellens off the front. Quinziato chasing with Losado, De Marchi, and Travis Meyer. Another good look at Alberto Contador. Looks fairly comfortable with just over 3 miles to go on his wheel. Danny Navarro from the Katusha squad starting the stage in 4th overall. Behind that man who just flashed through your screen, Mick Rogers. Mick Rogers on the wheel of yesterday's stage winner, Samuel Sanchez.
Now, the most alarming thing about Contador at the race this year here at the Dauphiné was the time trial performance when he lost 2:44 to Chris Froome. But if you look back over his other Dauphiné individual time trial performances in the years he went on to win the Tour de France back in '07, he lost 3 minutes 21 seconds to the winner that day and almost 2 minutes 50 seconds to Cadel Evans, who's also good in the mountains and against the clock. In '09, he lost 45 seconds to Cadel and was 5th on the day. And then in 2010, he also raced the Dauphiné, went on to win the Tour. That race was expunged because of the doping suspension, but he was 146 behind the winner Yanni Brajkovic in the Dauphiné time trial that year and lost almost a minute to TJ Van Garderen. So he has lost time in Dauphiné time trials in the past and then turned things around and come good for the Tour.
No hiding in the time trial, and if you're suffering from some allergies, it's easy to lose quite a bit of time.
Now the pace picking up here at the front of the field. Now some other riders trying to come off the front. That's Alberto Contador for Saxo Takeoff, who's got a gap with the Radio Shack rider ahead of Team Sky.
Still a pretty solid advantage for Tim Wellens. 5 kilometers or just over 3 miles to the finish line and holding on to just about 2 minutes. Bo Hassenhagen has done his job. He pops just about 5Ks, 3 miles to the line. Tony Gallopin looks to be the man from the Radio Shack squad. And Contador putting in a little bit of an attack here. Let's see if he can get closer to our lone leader, Tim Wellens. He's still about 1:50 down.
Crashing on the descent of the last climb. Now a little acceleration on the slopes of the final climb. Now here comes Alessandro Di Marchi in the green for Cannondale, clawing his way inch by inch back up towards Tim Wellens, our leader.
Now Di Marchi coming back into the front. Quinziato, Losado, and Travis Meyer, see where they are. But a very steady climb. Di Marchi knowing his pace perfectly so far and catching back up to Tim Wellens.
These are riders behind the main field.
Matthew Boucher, the American, on the Radio Shack squad. Alexander Geniez, 15th in the overall standings, 3rd in the young rider competition. That competition still led by Rowan Dennis, but he only has 1 minute over Michael Kwiatkowski.
All right, so Gallopin and Contador extending their lead ever so slightly over the main field that has the top GC contenders. And Contador maybe looking to strike one psychological blow, make a statement on the final day of the Dauphiné ahead of the Tour.
Steph Clement getting dropped there. He starts the stage in 7th overall. Andrew Talansky hanging tough right there in the front group, being led by the Sky squad.
And Di Marchi has passed Tim Wellens here, so the man in green near the top of the screen, he's now our new lone leader. They're trading punches, body blows left and right at the front of the race, but the gap coming down to 90 seconds and under 5K left. On this last climb of the race, the rider in the blue, that is Michael Rogers, the Australian for Saxo Tinkoff. He's getting dropped by the main field and potentially losing his podium spot. He started the day in 3rd place behind Chris Froome and Richie Porte.
Danny Moreno starting the day only 10 seconds behind Mick Rogers, and Danny Navarro only 12 seconds behind that man, number 16, in the blue and yellow of the Saxo squad. Michael Rogers had his teammate Contador working for him yesterday, and it looks like Contador is going to wait for him once again, try to pace him back into this front group.
Yeah, this is all about keeping Rogers on the podium right now, with Contador having attacked the yellow jersey group, now dropping back through them to pick up his teammate Michael Rogers. Meantime, Alessandro Di Marchi is our lone leader right now. He passed Tim Wellens earlier on the climb. So now, like yesterday, it's Contador pacing the Australian Michael Rogers. But Rogers clearly struggling as DeMarquis is down to the final 3K. That's just inside of 2 miles to the finish.
Geraint Thomas now on the front of the group. Michael Rogers struggling to keep the wheel of his teammate Alberto Contador. Contador looked to be on the attack for the stage win. Hearing that Michael Rogers was in trouble, Contador has now sat up and waited for Michael Rogers. And he is losing ground to the lead group here, led by Geraint Thomas. Richie Porte second wheel. Under 2 miles left in the bike race, but Chris Froome still looking supreme. Third wheel in the yellow jersey, leading the Dauphiné, and just a couple of miles from glory for Chris Froome.
He's won every stage race he has entered this year, with the exception of Tirreno Adriatico, where he finished second. And it looks like he's on his way to another win at the Dauphiné. Contador continues to pace Michael Rogers. Froome behind Geraint Thomas and Richie Porte. And this was just a moment ago, Froome talking into his radio back to the team car.
Pressing on the microphone to get a message to the sports director. Maybe hearing the news that Michael Rogers has been dropped. And just to keep a steady tempo, Alessandro DeMarquis closing in on 2 kilometers left to the finish line. But our third place and final podium of the Dauphiné is in trouble. Michael Rogers being dropped and helped by Contador now, trying to get back into the front group. But this man, Alessandro DeMarquis, has left all of the riders from the breakaway, closing in on 1 mile left of racing. He tried this yesterday, was unsuccessful, and giving it another go on today's stage.
'27-year-old Italian, former national track champion, looking for his first ever professional win on the road. And Michael Rogers looking more and more like he's going to lose his third place and podium spot here, as Contador is now opening up a gap on his teammate. Maybe this is a sign that Rogers isn't going to have the legs, and Contador is better off just riding on.
It's a little bit of a odd tactical maneuver by Saxo.
Now he sits back.
Rogers regrouping a little bit, trying to get back onto the wheel of Alberto Contador. We're going to have to wonder what would have happened if Contador stayed in the front group. They're chasing down the lone leader. Travis Myers just about to get caught by the chase, being led by Geraint Thomas.
Yeah, this is the summit finish. You can see how it levels off at the top after hitting about 9% with 2K left to go. So the steepest part of the climb coming up here shortly for our leader, Alessandro DeMarquis. And then the yellow jersey group behind. Chris Froome just with 1 teammate now, Richie Porte in front of him. Further back down the road, Contador continues to pace Michael Rogers.
Tim Wellens being caught now, and Chris Froome goes. Chris Froome, the first moment we've seen him at the front of the chase group here in today's stage. Richie Porte, the only man, his own teammate, capable of matching the acceleration from our race leader. 2 kilometers, 1.2 miles left in the bike race, and the 2 Sky Riders at the top of the standings have dropped all of their competitors so far on today's stage.
It's really only been one other stage where we've seen Chris Froome make a big acceleration at the top of a climb late in a stage. That's when he was chasing Contador and eventually passed him for a stage win earlier in the week. Now on the move with Contador well back down the road, and Richie Porte right on his wheel. The gap to our leader under a minute with just under 2 kilometers left to go.
And a brilliant display of climbing prowess by our race leader, talking to his teammate Richie Porte there. This is our lone leader. That acceleration by Chris Froome has taken a lot of time out of him. Every pedal stroke that Chris Froome makes, he gets closer to our lone leader and perhaps a stage win. Talk about a psychological blow to your rivals. Chris Froome pedaling off the front. Tremendous ride here by the 2 leaders of the bike race and the 2 Skymen that will lead that squad into the Tour de France. Richie Porte and Chris Froome.
Much further down the road, Alberto Contador, number 11, continuing to ride for his teammate Michael Rogers. And we see where Contador is well out of the picture, but How about the other top climbers and GC contenders? Joaquim Rodriguez, Jakob Bolsong, Alejandro Valverde, Sammy Sanchez. Nowhere to be found when Froome launched this move.
Clearly distancing himself from his rivals. Richie Porte really struggling to stay on the wheel of his team captain. Maybe this is a portent of things to come in the Tour de France. Chris Froome, supreme on this, the last mountain stage of the Dauphiné.
Now, his victory in the overall just about secured. Do you think this is about testing himself for the Tour?
He said he wasn't quite 100% at this point in the season. It's hard to imagine if he can improve a little bit how ferocious he'll be in the Tour de France. But yes, he's throwing caution to the wind, the gauntlet down, and streaking to the finish line, pulling Richie Porte along with him, distancing themselves from Alberto Contador and Michael Rogers. Michael Rogers, the only rider even within a minute and a half of Chris Froome at the start of the stage, but now that gap is going to increase if things stay the same all the way to the finish line.
Alessandro Di Marchi riding up into the clouds, and the gap coming down close to half a minute with just over 1 kilometer left to go, under a mile to the finish. And look who's trying to hunt him down, the yellow jersey and his teammate. The Lone Ranger in Tonto here as the red kite emerges. 1K left for Di Marchi.
Just a couple of 100 meters of the steepness of the climb, then it does level out for Di Marchi. He needs to get to that flat section road as quickly as he can. Then he might be able to hold off the charge of Froome and Richie Porte. But Chris Froome looking for a stage win as well. Richie Porte now in a little bit of trouble. Incredible riding by Chris Froome.
You could hear him talking for just a moment. Come on, mate. That's what he was saying. But this is the man at the very front, Alessandro Di Marchi. His lead slipping, but desperately trying to hang on with Froome and Porte just seconds behind.
Got about 15 seconds on those guys.
Counting the seconds to the riders behind, just 15 seconds. And the one man in front can't be much more than 20 seconds. Di Marchi just barely holding on. Chris Froome has already taken a minute out of Di Marchi's advantage in just the last couple of kilometers.
Now this is a move that's saying a lot to Chris Froome's biggest contenders for the upcoming Tour de France. And for Alessandro Di Marchi, he's not worried about the Tour. He's worried about trying to pull off the stage win. The 27-year-old Italian can just about taste it.
He's just gotten to the point of this climb that it levels off before the finish line, and that he couldn't have gotten there any sooner. Chris Froome charging there, and a long ways down the road, now within a kilometer go, is Contador and Michael Rogers. They are just now catching Geraint Thomas, who was doing a tremendous amount of work for Froome and Porte earlier in the stage.
Now, Alessandro Di Marchi, part of a large breakaway earlier in the stage. It was well over 20 riders came apart, and then riders were catching back on, getting a second and third wind. It was a very strange set of circumstances. Di Marchi, the only one left here at the end, however. Froome trying to get Porte to come with him here, but Richie Porte starting to suffer.
Looks like Chris Froome striking out for a stage win. He did seem to wait for Richie Porte a couple of times. That might make the difference for Di Marchi on the stage win. Now he's just a couple of 100 meters to go and holding on to a very slim advantage.
Up through the mist at the summit of this climb that will be used in the Tour de France next year. And it's the Italian Alessandro Di Marchi who is going to ride into his first ever professional win. And here comes Talansky in the blue for Garmin Sharp. Andrew Talansky catching on to Froome and Porte.
Out of the mist comes Andrew Talansky. Great little ride by Talansky, catching up to Froome and Porte. Great ride by the young American Andrew Talansky. Froome will finish second, but Andrew Talansky from nowhere gets third on the stage.
Through the fog, Andrew Talansky, who was suffering with a stomach problem in the first couple of stages, lost over 17 minutes in the first 2 days, but bouncing back at the end of the race.
And there's Fuglsang finishing. Danny Moreno coming up to the line also. Fuglsang perhaps moving into a podium spot there.
Now because Michael Rogers, who started the day in third, has lost some time and may be losing his podium as well.
Danny Navarro finishing up, started the day fourth. He might move into a podium spot. And there is Damiano Cunego and yesterday's stage winner Sammy Sanchez. Great stage win by Alessandro Di Marchi. But Andrew Talansky, wow, moving into third on the stage. But for Di Marchi, less a victory march than a cold and a broken hallelujah, just making into the finishing line, holding off Chris Froome and Andrew Talansky. This is Tim Wellens now. Had a chance for the stage win, but Di Marchi a little bit too strong, but still a solid ride by the young Belgian on the Lotto squad. Quite a bit better than his team captain, Jurgen van den Broek, who's had a miserable Dauphiné.
And now here comes Contador leading Michael Rogers up to the finish. Contador crashing on a descent on these wet roads earlier in the stage. Got right back up, caught back to the main field, and then dropped back to pace Michael Rogers, his teammate, up this climb, trying to protect his podium spot. Doesn't look like that's going to happen. Alessandro Di Marchi finished ahead of everybody. And the one-time national track champion in Italy is a first-time pro winner on the road at the Dauphiné.
More relieved than elated just to make it to the top of the mountain. That's an incredible ride, holding off the best in the business. Chris Froome, Richie Porte, Andrew Talansky, Alberto Contador, Sammy Sanchez, Alejandro Valverde. A great win by Alessandro Di Marchi.
Di Marchi, Froome, and Talansky. First three as Talansky shot in front of Richie Porte. And what a confidence boost it has to be for the young American after struggling early in this race to finish like this right behind Froome on the final stage.
If I'm the Garmin team, I think this is enough for Andrew Talansky to earn a spot on the Tour de France squad. So we could see Andrew Talansky make his debut in the Tour de France just inside of 3 weeks.
Alessandro Di Marchi gets the win. Froome and Talansky round out the top three. Joaquim Rodriguez, Alejandro Valverde coming in within 1 minute, but losing contact on that final climb when Chris Froome launched his acceleration. Alessandro Di Marchi, the survivor of a big breakaway earlier, gets the stage win, and we'll talk to the overall race victor, Chris Froome, when we come back. Alessandro Di Marchi, the Italian from Cannondale, gets the stage win riding in solo after surviving a big early breakaway and also surviving the attack of the overall race winner, Chris Froome, late on that final climb.
Track star to a mountain star. Alessandro Di Marchi from Italy, the Cannondale squad, teammates with Peter Sagan. We'll see Sagan on the sprints of the Tour de France, but that was a fantastic effort to win the stage.
And he is the subject of our competitive cyclist ride of the day.
Knew his pace better than anybody, the remnants of the breakaway. Tim Wellens, Manuel Quinziato, Travis Meyer coming to the last climb together, but Di Marchi knowing his tempo the best and winning the stage.
And our final podium, led by Chris Froome, the winner, his teammate Richie Porte in second, and the final spot on the podium going to Danny Moreno, the Spaniard for Katusha, who supplants Michael Rogers. The Australian started the day in third, dropped back on the final climb. Moreno moves up to get on the podium.
Terrible day for Mick Rogers on the last climb, just about 3 miles from the top. Mick Rogers being dropped, not even the help of none other than Alberto Contador could help Mick Rogers maintain his podium spot. Danny Moreno moves into third.
But Chris Froome, with his fourth overall win in a stage race this year, winning every stage race he has entered with the exception of Tirreno Adriatico, where he finished second. A terrific season to this point, and now seemingly topping off his form ahead of his run at the Tour de France in just a few weeks. Chris Froome looking really good as he hunts for that yellow jersey in July.
Christopher, horrific conditions for this final stage, but you managed to hang on. You were close to winning the stage. It went as planned.
100%. I don't think we could ask for too much more with first and second on the general classification, and if you look at this as a sort of a bit of a test run, if you like, for what's to come in July, I think the team's come out with flying colours so far.
Winning the Dauphiné obviously means something. You're a winner after several victories this season. Winning the Dauphiné obviously is important for a career, I guess.
Definitely. I mean, I don't want to take anything away from the Dauphiné. It's a huge race in its own right. And winning this is, again, I mean, adding to what's just been a dream season for me so far.
The man who was sitting on that seat a year ago, Bradley Wiggins, went on to win the Tour de France. That's obviously your goal as well.
Definitely, I'm going to try. I'm going to do everything I can, but obviously in cycling, nothing's guaranteed. Yeah, we can only give it our all, and I know I've got the backing of a really strong team to go into it with. So so far, everything's looking good for us.
Confident, but still a lot of work to do?
Yeah, we're going to stay around here, around this area for the next 8 days training and looking at some of the routes for the Tour de France. But yeah, definitely hopefully have a glass of wine tonight and celebrate with the boys.
You're the favorite of the Tour de France. You're well aware of that.
It's a difficult place to be in. It's never nice to be considered the favorite, but yeah, given the circumstances and the backing of the team, I think we stand a good chance in July.
Thank you very much. Congrats.
Trying to be modest, Bob, but he is clearly the #1 favorite for the Tour.
Most definitely. Chris Froome has done everything right so far this year. He's got 3 weeks of rest before the Tour starts. 20 days to be exact.
Rohan Dennis wore the yellow jersey at this race for one day earlier in the week. He finishes with the white jersey as the best young rider, and that may be enough to get the Australian a ride for Garmin Sharp at the upcoming Tour de France. Well, speaking of, the 100th edition of the Tour de France begins June 29th, 7:30 a.m. Eastern, right here on the NBC Sports Network, the biggest part of the Epic Cycle Series presented by Michelob Ultra. Chris Froome will go in as the big favorite. And for more, you can go to our website, nbcsports.com. Alessandro Di Marchi wins the final stage of the Dauphiné. And now for Bob Roll, I'm Steve Schlanger. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you at the Tour.